Hi, and welcome to the Flying Focus Video Bus's 12th Busiversary. We're celebrating 12 years of programming on Portland Cable Access. And my name is Dan Handelman. I've been with Flying Focus since we were founded in 1991. And tonight we're going to step out from behind the cameras and try to demystify the process of making TV a little bit, explain to you the shows that we did over the past year or so. And we did about 17 new programs, and we had about 5 producers and somewhere between 5 and 10 people out there in the field videotaping stuff and hauling our equipment around and just keeping the enterprise going, as it were. We're a nonprofit group and we welcome people to get involved. We're all volunteers. Our phone number is 503-239-7456. You can find out our show times at 503-321-5120. You can email us at ffvc@agora.ardrop.com. So let's get ready to roll here. We'll talk about some of the shows that we produced on the video bus. And I'm actually going to start out by telling you about some of the shows that I produced. This year, the U.S. went to war with Iraq. And so many of our shows actually revolved around that issue. Actually, at least 5 of our video bus episodes were totally about the war in Iraq. And the one I'm about to show you a clip from was made in February of 2003. It was a teach-in that was done in December of 2002. Goudarz Eghtedari, who's from Iran, did a workshop about Iran and Iraq's other neighbors. And what you're going to hear is some information from somebody who knows the region really well and a little bit of background about kind of what U.S. policy is in the whole area.
To the east of Iraq is Iran. The problem between Iraqis and Iranians for the past, well, say 30, 40 years, were that again, Iran was not part of Ottoman Empire at no time, but there were Arabs living in southwestern Iran, and most of oil fields are in that area. It's called Khuzestan. Part of that nationalistic approach of Saddam Hussein when he came to power was to liberate Arabs from southern Iran. So as soon as the Islamic Revolution in 1979 happened, and during the process the revolution was going through basically downsizing military and firing all the generals who worked for the Shah and so on and so forth, Saddam Hussein found the time for attacking and occupying and liberating those Arab zones. The U.S. was supporting Iraq in that period to the extent of giving intelligence from their satellite coverage, the location of Iranian military, and also helping them in developing chemical weapons, what is now the crime of Iraqis. Rumsfeld was a person who went to Iraq about a week after Iraqis bombed Kurds in Halabja and killed thousands and thousands of people. And he was in Iraq and he basically blessed what was happening. And now the irony is that he's now on the other side complaining about weapons of mass destruction.
The next show I did about Iraq was actually a couple of weeks after the war broke out in late March. And what it was a show that showed an action that was done, it was meant to be a civil disobedience action at the Federal Building here in Portland. And people from the faith community, led by Frank Fromherz, who was with the Archdiocese of Portland's Justice and Peace Office, marched from City Hall to the Federal Building and linked arms in front of the doorway there and hoped that they would get arrested and dragged off to show their protest of the war. It happened that the day that they did this action was this day the war actually broke out. It was about 6 hours after they did the action. And it started pouring rain in the middle of it. It was a very moving experience to be there. And I'm going to play a little bit of a clip of some of the music that was sung and also have a little bit of Frank Fromherz explaining what was done. And I think one thing that's really important for me to note is that Frank was fired from his job for speaking out against the war. Even though the Pope was against the war, Frank lost his job for opposing the war.
I was certainly one of those people, but there were many others from a variety of, I think, backgrounds, certainly among those who felt called to risk arrest, and all who were then present in solidarity with those individuals who were there near the entrance of the federal building. But I think there probably was a particular cast to this particular action where we were, I think, very deliberately inviting people from some of the organized religious traditions. For example, a couple of the individuals were wearing collar, precisely in order to convey, very deliberately and very intentionally, to convey to our mainstream religious communities that when we're dealing with a phenomenon that is so unjust. There's a certain point in the Mass where that is grant us peace, dona nobis pacem. You know, dona nobis pacem.
PC with Flying Focus Video Collective, interviewing Martin. Okay, Martin, tell me what you were doing when you were 14. That's 8 years ago?
8 years ago. That's when I started working for Flying Focus.
Oh my goodness.
PC.
What'd you do?
I just fooled around with the studio, did crew and stuff, but this year is my first year
Now
as
I want you to know
producer.
he's a whiz. He can do it all.
This is the first time this summer that I have actually produced a program with Flying Focus, though. And both of my programs this year were about the war in Iraq, and I think that's what really got me going to start producing some programs. I know we've all heard a lot about the war in Iraq this year from the mainstream media, but there's some things that we haven't heard. And that's why I filmed these two guys that have been to Iraq, and so could have an idea of what's really going on there. And one thing we don't hear a lot about is the real cost of the war. I mean, we've heard a lot of dollar figures from Bush, about $87 billion and stuff like this, but we haven't heard how many civilian casualties there were, for example. And this war was really a war on civilians, and nobody knows that better than David Robinson, because he went to Iraq about a year ago. And David Robinson is the director of Pax Christi USA. They're a Catholic peace organization, and he presented this summer to their chapter that just started in Portland. And he talked about his experiences in Iraq about a year ago.
One of the upshots of the gas war between Iran and Iraq was that they started building bomb shelters that were hardened against chemical attack, especially self-sealing, so that the gas couldn't get in. And this one in Amarai neighborhood had a capacity of 1,400 people, and it was full on the night of February 13th, full of women, children, and old men. And the United States targeted with 2 cruise missiles that night. First one blew through the 14-foot concrete roof, blew a hole 10 feet in diameter. 4 minutes later, the second cruise missile arrived, went down the hole blown by the first one, and exploded inside, incinerating 400 people instantly, injuring hundreds of others. When the teams went into Hiroshima after that explosion, they were horrified to find human beings shadowified right into concrete walls. That's what's inside Amaria. There are 2 images that are unmistakable. They're both women, and they're both clutching babies. The United States never apologized for Amaria. The United States said they had intelligence reports that Iraqi military were going in and out of there, so it was obviously a command and control bunker and a legitimate target. I have no doubt they were soldiers going in and out of Amoriah, carrying their grandmother's bags and visiting their wives and kids. But I bring that up not so much now to rehash an old horror, but because it played out in a particularly gruesome way this time. You see, the Iraqis turned Amoriah into a shrine, and they commemorate that day each year. So everybody in Baghdad knows about Amoriah. And because of that, this time, the people that did remain in Baghdad, by and large, refused to go into the shelters.
Another thing that you don't hear a lot about on the main media about this war is what a broad base of opposition it had and how people from all walks of life were getting together to oppose this war. And I think these two programs really demonstrate that, because David Robinson is so different than this next guy, Joel Preston Smith. He's a freelance photojournalist from Portland, and he actually worked with the U.S. Army during the first Gulf War. But this time he went over as a civilian in February, and he took some pictures of everyday life in Iraq and civilian life.
I'm going to show you a series of photographs taken at a grade school where a teacher told her students that they needed to face their fears by drawing U.S. fighter jets and bombers that might kill them. Next slide. This is the teacher. Her name is Goudarz Sadi, and she had been at the school for 5 days. When the concern over bombing became so intense that she decided that she was going to talk with her students about the possibility of being killed and how to cope with being in a city that was under attack. And she told them to draw U.S. fighter jets, attack helicopters, and bombers. Okay, next slide. We just run next, and you can tell she was very animated and talking with the class. And if you look at the kids' faces, what you're seeing is not just their concerns about thinking that they'll be killed or that other students that are their friends will be killed, but Sadi also told them that they needed to find bomb shelters in their neighborhoods. And the kids had been drawing the Amoriah shelter. It's something that happened. These were 9-year-old children. It happened 3 years before they were born. And so I could see this conflict in their faces. On the one hand, she is asking me to look for a bomb shelter in my neighborhood so that I might be able to survive the war. And on the other hand, I have to think about what happened in the Amoriah shelter, because there's nobody in Iraq who is a literate person, illiterate in the sense of being able to communicate, who can speak and has a mind, a consciousness, who doesn't know about the Amoriah shelter. It's my lie for them 1,000 times over.
I'm going to introduce Adam now, new member of Flying Focus, and he'll give us an idea of when he got involved and what was of interest to him to get involved with Flying Focus.
I am Adam Bernstein. I've been with Flying Focus for about a year, and I've been an amateur filmmaker and got involved with taping and editing, producing Flying Focus shows. So the first clip I want to introduce is the Kurdish Perspective. That's another important issue because it's one of the most important human rights issues and most ignored of the Middle East, the Kurdish issue. So it dealt with the Kurds' problems with Turkey, with Iraq, within Iraq, and their aspirations for cultural, economic, and political autonomy, and even dealt with Kurdish Jewish origins, which most people aren't aware of.
The two main competitors for Kurdish political power, the Talabani family and the Barzani family, came together and said, this is getting us nowhere. We got to cooperate and stop fighting. Never mind the reasons, the standard political reasons. The fact is they have since then managed to maintain up there in the northern Iraqi no-fly zone, known as the Kurdish Regional Government. They have managed to put together a really extraordinary picture of a Switzerland-like peaceful community with a government that's actually coming together, with a parliament and all of that sort of thing. I would never personally have expected that anyone to be able to do that. Kurdish society is still heavily driven by family loyalties. And family loyalties tends to undercut what we think of as a democratic government, but it seemed not to be stopping it. Hasn't yet. The real question is, what will stop it? And of course, the fear is that U.S. interests, which override local Kurdish interests, whatever the promises, may in fact stop it, just as it did when the British made their promise. This is the biggest worry. Now, Kurdish leadership is fully aware of that possibility, and I thought maybe you could tell me more about that.
My reaction has been, indeed, had we had democratic states in the region, primarily in Iraq, Turkey, and Iran, probably the Kurdish issue would not have resurfaced as has been in the last 40 or 50 years. It just Kurds, like a lot of Israelis, have been in defensive position for many, many decades. Simply, they have been deprived of the very basic principle that they endured, they had it for many, many centuries.
The next clip I want to introduce is from the March 15th Peace March, which happened just a few days before the war started. It's a 90-minute march, and the reason it took so long is that's how long it took the march to go by. It's the biggest march in Portland history, over 30,000 people, and we had 3 cameras.
And that was, let's see, Jim Lockhart and Frank Mahoney, as well as yourself.
Yeah, exactly. So we all we all shot it, and then I edited it with Barb, and we spliced it all together.
We're going to start with a new section, Organizing for Change. It's a new section in our catalog, and here are some of the tapes that were part of that section.
Okay, well, these tapes were sponsored by Oregon Peace Institute, and the first one was the first show I taped with Flying Focus, with your help. It's called Creating Enemies, and it's an important show because it deals with, it's directed at peace activists and how they should have a wider holistic perspective of things, whether to stop the us versus them mentality, which is really playing the game of the culture we're trying to change. So, you know, in a lot of the activists at the workshop had a problem with the use of the word we, because they couldn't get rid of that us versus them mentality, and that's important for peace activists to do.
Anyone who happens to be within the net of Oregon Peace Institute's publications and invitations to events is probably someone who has self-identified at some point as a peace activist of some kind, right? And so how can we as peace activists, people who profess, you know, to believe in peace and love and not hate and war, acknowledge the place within us where we also are participating in a system of hatred that perpetuates the kinds of destruction that we see in the outer world. I want to start this workshop by talking about the us and not the them, right? It would be really easy for us to start talking about enemies and pointing fingers at the media and politicians and all of the, you know, evil access people, our own evil access, our reactive evil access of people, axis of people who are perpetuating endification in the world and in our culture. And rather than doing that, I'm hoping that we can take a more humble approach to this and recognize that we're all enmeshed in this system and that we all contribute to it in subtle and more overt ways. What I want to do is just take a step to the side for a minute and talk a little bit more of this idea of endification, and then go back to how media influences or indoctrinates us into this practice of making enemies. Every time we have an incident like the propaganda that we're currently being bombarded with in terms of the evil Saddam Hussein, who, if you notice, we don't even call him Saddam Hussein anymore, we call him Saddam. And I wondered if they're calling George Bush George.
I would like to introduce Barb. She's a member of Flying Focus, and she's done a lot of work. Recently, what? We know how you got involved. You were born with us.
Seems that way sometimes,
I see.
but not quite.
Go ahead.
This next program is another OPI workshop. That's
right.
the Oregon Peace Institute.
Right.
This one's about conflict within groups.
Part one.
Part one, yes. And anyone who's ever worked with a progressive group in Portland or anywhere knows that there can be sometimes a bit of conflict within groups.
Quote.
Quote. Yes.
Okay.
And this one is, she talks about the concept of forming, storming, norming, and performing. It's very interesting, and it has some humor in it, too.
Should we look at the clip?
Let's look at it.
After forming, we have storming. Most specifically, it's the point of figuring out where the power is going to be in the group. And it's going to be that destructive kind of conflict that I talked about, which can be destructive if you get stuck in it, but can be constructive if you can resolve it and move through it. But people are going to be jostling for position. Okay. All right, I've decided now that everybody in here is pretty cool. I think this group has a pretty good mission. I'm in for it. Yeah, I think I'll stick around. Okay, now, am I going to have influence in this group? And how much am I going to have? And I have to kind of elbow other people around maybe a little bit to make sure I have a space, that I don't get ignored, that I don't get interrupted, that I don't get, put in the category of, oh, this is the person who, who's little Mary Sunshine or something like that, but never has anything to say that, is really meaty. Or my gray hair. Oh, she's an old person, she doesn't know what's going on. This is the time when all this is happening and all these interpersonal struggles are going on. This is the time when scapegoating can be a solution to all of that. Well, I don't have to deal with my conflict with you and you and you and you. I'll just put it all on you, and then we'll, get other people to get together with me, and we'll maybe get you out of the group. And that way, we'll get really close together, and we really haven't had to deal with our own problems that we're having with each other. They'll come up later, but for now, we've resolved the problem with the storming.
And this next clip is from the third OPI workshop.
Did I tape that?
You did.
Uh-oh. And I bet it's about consensus.
It's about consensus building, yes.
Right.
And the difference between, the difference that making decisions by consensus can make in a group. And it can make a really big difference.
Yeah. In the outcome and in the
and in how
conducting
the group works.
how the group.
Right, exactly. Let's take a look.
Okay.
In the birth of democracy, we came up with a conflict model, right? Democracy and birth of capitalism. The idea is if everybody looks out for their own well-being and has the right to speak for themselves and has the right to disagree and the right to dissent, then the competition of ideas will have the invisible hand of the economy move things along so that we'll come up with what would make the most sense, right? You're going to put out more money for something you want more and less for something you don't. It's this kind of voting that goes on socioeconomically. It's a conflict model that allows people to compete with each other. When I ask people who've been using consensus for 20 years and more about, well, what would you do if you had a brand new proposal to bring in? How would you start? And they said, first I would walk around and talk to all the people that would have concerns with it and have problems with it. And I'd find out what their concerns were so that I could frame it in a way that they were most likely to go along with the meeting. When I go to a group that uses majority rule and I say, how would you frame a proposal? They say, first I would walk around and find all the people who would agree with me and see what they want to get them on my side, and then go in. So when you do a hybrid and you try to mix those two models together, what you'll end up with is people saying, yeah, sure, we'll move together in a cooperative model, but I'm going to count heads and see who's agreeing with me, and as soon as I got a majority, I'm going to jump. So you lose your buy-in. People lose the ability to stop it when they know there's a good reason to stop it, because they know that there's a majority rule. So you end up losing some of that inner logic of it. So if you're going to mix models, just be very aware that you're doing that to be creative with it. It's done a lot. But it's one of the reasons why consensus seems like a 99% vote, and people go, no way am I going to give that much power to one person with one vote. But that's because you're mixing the models, and you're
Hi, thank you for joining us in part one of the anniversary show this year of 2003. And we'll give you a phone number where you can get in touch with us.
That would be 503-239-7456, and we'd love to have you join us, help us make the news.
How about
make
the other
media.
number too? We'll give them that one too.
Sure, the other number is 503-321-5051.
So you've just been watching part one. Join us next time for part two.
Same bat time, same bat station.
Anniversary show. Bye.
See ya.
What is it?
Bye. What?
I'm trying to remember the fingers.
Live long and prosper.
Yeah.